Hey everybody, my name is Daminga Porter, Senior Community Changemaker with Ben & Jerry's, and this is The Scoop, bite-sized interviews to keep you in the know. I am super excited today to be with a great friend from an amazing organization here to talk to us about voting, about the criminal justice system, and information that you definitely need to know. So I'm super excited to announce my guest today, Douglas Ammar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Douglas, I'd love for you to begin. I want you to introduce yourself and the amazing organization that you represent.
Thank you, Daminga, and thank you for having me, and thank you for all the Ben & Jerry's is doing. And we're really excited about this effort, particularly around voting. So my name is Doug Ammar. I am a lawyer and the executive director of the Georgia Justice Project, and I have worked here at the Georgia Justice Project for 30 years. The organization is about 35 years old, and our work is all focused on criminal justice. We are a small nonprofit in Atlanta, but we do work all over the state. Our work really focuses on two main goals. One, to try to reduce the number of people in the state who are under correctional control. And that's people in jail, prison, or on probation or parole. And the second goal we've always had is to help remove barriers for reentry. So, or to help people succeed on reentry when they are out of the system, out of jail, out of prison, or out of any entanglement with the criminal justice system. And we do direct service work. That's sort of our heart. That's what we represent. Close to about 1,000 folks a year, work with about another 1,500 folks, talk to a few more thousand about their criminal records, about barriers to reentry. And we also do policy work at the State House primarily, and had a big win this year in getting a change and expanding expungement in the state of Georgia to include some convictions for the first time ever. We're very excited about. And we also do community engagement and outreach. So our work is multifaceted and totally privately supported and based here in the community, right behind Dr. King's grave in the old Fourth Ward of Atlanta for the last 35 years.
Awesome. I love the grassroots work, especially reducing recidivism. And I know that this is an issue not only in Georgia, but across the US. I'm super excited for you joining us today. And I want to go ahead and start with my first question here. What are the stages of the criminal justice system? I really want our viewers here to kind of know some more about that.
Sure. So a lot of us in the criminal justice sort of world talk about it in three buckets. I am a three-bucket person, by the way, but three buckets in sort of front end, middle, and back end. And front end is sort of anywhere from policing all the way to sort of case conclusions. So policing, arrest, charging by a prosecutor, and a resolution in court, however it goes. And the middle bucket is often sort of punishment, or really primarily incarceration. Most people just think of prison for that. And the third bucket is when you're not incarcerated, sort of the reentry aspect. You could be on probation or parole, as a lot of folks say on paper, or it could be cases that people whose cases are long over, but they still have a criminal record and they're trying to get back on their feet. So that's like the back end side of reentry. And a lot of folks, we actually work in all three of those areas and have for a long time. But that's one way of sort of quickly having a pivot point to talk about engagement in the criminal justice system.
Awesome. Thank you. And for the work that Georgia Justice Project does, do you guys work through, I guess, all those three buckets?
We do. We the thing we've done the longest is we represent people. We're like a private public defender. Is that we represent people. All of what we do is free of charge, by the way. And we represent people who are on the edge of being arrested or arrested. Sometimes we represent people pre-arrest. But what makes us different from any law firm or public defender is we follow our clients and their families all the way through. So we regularly visit our people if they're in prison, and then we also will help them when they get out of prison. Our work in prison has expanded in the last few years. We're actually representing hundreds of people at a local prison here in Atlanta called the Metro Reentry Facility, just helping them overcome barriers that have been identified before they get out, like driver's license issues and holds and fines and fees. And other impediments to their success. And then we work, where the biggest bucket of our work is we represent a whole nother set of folks who will walk in our office when we were walking in offices, or meet us at a number of events, over 100 events we engage in around the state every year, and asking for help to overcome a barrier to reentry. And often, most often, that's a criminal record. We represent folks all over the state, either trying to expunge, correct, fix their record, or to get the benefit or opportunity they were trying to get that the record was a barrier to. So housing and jobs are the two big ones, but there are other issues as well. So we're engaged in sort of all aspects of the system, and of course, as well as policy that affects all aspects of those three buckets.
That is beautiful work and definitely, definitely needed. Thank you so much for existing, honestly. And I want to kind of turn this to, it's, when people kind of, get in trouble with the law sometimes, it can affect their ability to vote. I want to, why is it an important part of the reentry process for people to restore their right to vote?
Well, it's absolutely essential, we believe, is a big part of people rejoining society. I mean, the struggles to reenter are many, and the big ones, as I kind of already mentioned, are housing and job, with anybody getting back on their feet from whatever circumstance. And so many of the barriers that we work on and that most people think about for those who are formerly incarcerated, it relate to their ability to take care of themselves and their family. And that's huge. We do a lot of work on that. But if you think about it, what is the one area of life that somebody can contribute back to society, that they can show their involvement, that they can be part of helping shape where society is going? And that's voting. And they say, listen, that's the way we all show up to help direct the country, help our voice be heard. And that's an integral part of rejoining society, is to help shape where we're all going together. And if someone can't do that, if someone's stopped from their voice being heard, their ability to help be part of the collective will moving forward, that's just one more and one huge impediment to them feeling like and actually being part of the rest of society that's helping shape the future.
And it's super important, especially that democratic right to vote, no matter, who you are, what color you are. We've gone so long and some groups haven't been able to have the ability to vote. So if you are able to have that, I think it's such a beautiful thing to be able to exercise that right. Now, I know in Georgia and especially in other states, some people get a little confused because they're not sure, all right, I have a criminal record. Am I able to vote? I'm a felon. Am I able to vote? Some people get confused. Can you clear that up for us?
Yeah, we see a lot of confusion out there and have for years. As I mentioned, we do a lot of presentations and engagements around the state. And one of the first things we always talk about for the last time with 5 or 10 years is trying to at least correct the myth that's out there. So one of the myths that's out there in Georgia and really all over the country is if I've been convicted of a felony, I can't vote ever again. And that has been true in other states. It's been true in Alabama and in Florida, our neighbors, for instance. But in Georgia, that's never been the case. So, or at least not for the last 100 years. So the law in Georgia is actually quite simple in some ways, and it's in the state constitution, 2 sentences. And it basically says that if you are convicted of a felony of moral turpitude, and by the way, that has been interpreted to be all felonies, but if you're convicted of a felony of moral turpitude, then while you're under sentence, while you're serving that sentence, you cannot vote. But when that sentence is over, you can re-register to vote. So one of the things we find is that there's a lot of folks don't realize that they might have been on probation 10, 20 years ago. They might have just gotten out of jail or prison and the case is over. It was a felony conviction. It is on the record, but they think they can never vote again in Georgia, and that's not the case. So as soon as someone's sentence is complete, they can walk to their local voting registration office and register to vote. And I will say that sometimes people do get confused. They think, well, I was convicted in another state. And I know they say, well, I was convicted in North Carolina, and North Carolina might not have let me vote for 20 years. How does that apply to Georgia? And Georgia interprets it this way: your conviction in North Carolina, as long as your sentence is complete in whatever state you came from, that's the gauge they use here in Georgia. So even if your conviction for a felony is in Idaho, if your sentence is over and you try to register in Georgia, you will be allowed to register. The voting rules of the state you came from, or where the felony came from, do not control your ability to vote in Georgia.
Thank you for breaking that down. That definitely clears up a lot of things. Now, let's just say someone does not have a felony charge. They have a misdemeanor charge, and they're currently incarcerated, and they're currently in, for instance, like a county jail. do they have the ability to vote?
Well, they have the right to vote. The ability might be a little bit of a stretch, because getting the voting activity, the actual mechanism of voting inside jails and prisons, is not necessarily an obvious or easy thing. But with regard to whether they are eligible to vote, yes. In fact, you can be charged with a felony and sitting in jail. I mean, we represent people charged with felonies. I was at the jail yesterday, and a client who's been in jail facing a very serious charge for over 2 years, and the trial's coming up in the first of this next year. Technically, he could vote because he is not under sentence of a felony. He is facing a felony charge. So even if you're in jail with a felony charge or misdemeanor charge, as long as you're not under sentence for that charge or for a felony charge, you can vote. So, and there's a couple more caveats. Don't need to be too technical. And we do have some material, which I know we'd love for your viewers to see and have. We'll send links to talk about this, to lay this out. It's on our website as well. But there are a few caveats. If someone's convicted, say, of if they're under a first offender sentence, which actually is not a conviction, or something called conditional discharge, that is not a conviction. So they can vote even while they're reporting on probation, but it's technically not a conviction, and they can still vote.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. Like, that clears so much up for me. I know, well, hopefully that it clears stuff up for some of our viewers here. Now, compared to the rest of the country, is this something that other states are kind of working towards, do you think?
Yeah, this has been an issue for a while. I mean, quite sadly, but the realism here is that the disenfranchisement connected to the criminal justice involvement for folks really correlates, unfortunately, with race, the end of the end of Reconstruction, and these periods in our history where essentially for the last 120 years or so, since maybe 140 years, that we started to pull back as a country the right to vote from folk. And instead of using a straight color line, which of course was the way maybe it happened before, many states sort of used the criminal justice system as essentially an overlay into that, if you will, a proxy. And that's why the disenfranchisement for folk inside the criminal justice system correlates heavily to disenfranchisement around folk of color. But having said that, that's when you can sort of go back and see a lot of folks have done this research and shown the movement around the country of taking away the vote initially, starting 120, 140 years ago with criminal justice involvement. But to your question, there's actually been a sort of a counter movement. And for the last 10, 15, 20 years, especially when this country sort of woke up from this terrible nightmare of mass incarceration and war on drugs and war on crime, is that many states are moving the other direction and saying, what did we do back then, 100 years ago or 100 plus years ago? So some states are taking away those restrictions. And actually some states, a handful, even in the last 5 or so years, are saying, even if you're convicted of a felony, even if you're in prison, you have the right to vote and we're going to let you vote. So state by state, nationally, there's been a loosening up of those kind of restrictions. Florida, to our south, has been in the news a lot because they finally have changed some of their rules around this. Alabama, a few years ago, about 3 years ago, did the same thing, loosened up. Actually, not as even open as Georgia is, but still you see this movement. Some aggressive, some small steps. But I think as a general movement to basically not exclude people with a criminal record, not exclude people who've been justice involved from participating in civic society.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. Now my question for you, so for people that are currently, incarcerated, they, may want to participate in the upcoming election. How can their families help them?
That's a great question. And over the years, we've worked with a handful of groups that have been leading sort of not just voter registration drives in jails and prison, but also bringing the vote to those in jail and prison. And that's a very localized effort generally. First of all, who's getting into those jails, getting into those prisons. And jails are a little more ripe for that opportunity than prisons, because if you're in prison, almost by default, almost everybody in prison is under sentence for a felony. But having said that, there are a number of groups in the state who have been working on this for years, including the New Georgia Project or Pro Georgia, and groups connected with Stacey Abrams, other groups that she's involved in. The League of Women Voters. There's been a lot of groups that have tried and have mechanisms, if you will, to penetrate inside the jail and prison system to bring the vote to folk. And those are a few groups I would reach out to that we've worked with over the years to see if a family member is in a particular jail or institution, if the vote will be brought to them, if you will.
Gotcha. Thank you so much for that. For those of you that are listening, definitely, especially if you're in the state of Georgia and you want to help your family member, definitely reach out to those organizations so they can be able to help and especially get that vote. Now, I guess this is more of like an opinion question for you, Doug. Should voting rights be expanded for people with a criminal record in Georgia?
Well, I absolutely believe that that the movement around the country is the right movement. I mean, that we should. There are so many restrictions for people who have been criminal justice involved. Let me give you a couple examples of how severe this is. A number of national groups a few years ago, some even recently, have been pulling together lists of legal impediments to people who have a criminal record. So these are laws that exist in every state, and they wanted to count how many laws there were in the country for people that would basically negatively affect, and by the way, these are all negative effects, these are not positive effects, negatively affect someone who's been justice involved. And the count that the American Bar Association came up with a couple of years ago was 52,000. 52,000 laws. So basically about 1,000 laws per state that create an impediment for someone to do something in their lives if they have a criminal record. Voting is absolutely one of those many things that exist in state law or in the state constitutions that is one of those 52,000 sort of impediments. So we believe, of course, that first of all, if we want people to really rejoin society, if we want folks to be successful, and if we want more safety, more economic mobility, more economic movement for the entire country, then we've got to create a path for people who've been justice involved. Nationally, the number is something like 95% of everybody who's in a prison today is coming home. 95%. So the idea of excluding these people from anything or permanently is an artificial creation that really flies in the face of the fact that they are part of the community and that we all benefit if we really embrace them and make a path for them to rejoin successfully. So yes, I think voting is integral to that movement. I think as one of those many impediments that we should loosen or do away with. There are so many, as I point out. We work a lot on them around employment and some around housing. At the last count we had in Georgia, there were over 1,000. I want to say 1,016 is the last count we had for Georgia, to give you an example. Of course, voting being one. So yes, I think we should, as a country and certainly as a state, be moving more towards creating paths so folks not only feel like they're part of society, but really are part of society. Because we all suffer if folks don't feel connected. Because unfortunately, if folks can't get back on their feet and can't regain their footing, too often they're going to end up back in the criminal justice system, and nobody wants that. That's not good for anybody. And our clients don't want that, but they feel often desperate and a lack of hope. So yes, I think we should, as a country, what we could do to really show that we're committed to fully embracing and fully reintegrating people is to restore the right to vote, or not take it away in the first place, honestly, because those folks who are in prison, for instance, are still counted on the census. There's still a basis for federal distribution of funds. Therefore, why shouldn't they not also have their voice be heard if essentially they're being counted in other ways, but not in probably the most important way with regard to civic engagement?
Thank you. And it's super important, especially, if you were incarcerated, you're coming back into your community. If you want to be a part of that community, even if you're just looking at local elections, that your voice needs to be counted and your voice needs to be heard as a citizen. And especially if you're being counted in the census. I actually didn't think about that aspect of that, but that's like really important.
Sorry. Yes, it is. It is important. No, and it's interesting. And there's been some movement around that in the country. That is a lot of folks don't realize is that the government will count you one way, but not in another, and that seems to be inconsistent. So we ought to be more consistent, if you will, and more inclusive.
Definitely, definitely. And then with Georgia, I guess you could say we're getting a little progressive as far as, allowing, people who have that felony, conviction on their record to be able to still vote. But, what ways can Georgia improve?
Well, one of the ways we've run into with our clients, we've seen that folks who have served their sentence, who have satisfied the state constitutional requirement, would walk into a voting registration office, and the voting registration offices are often given lists of people who are been kicked off the rolls for various reasons, and sometimes given lists of people who have just gotten out of prison, or lists of people who have a felony conviction. I mean, I'm not faulting them per se with what they have in terms of information, because I mean, they're trying to do their job. But when our folks have tried to register, many of our clients have run into this barrier where the voting registration office says, well, it looks like, have you been convicted of a felony in the past? And our clients say, yeah, yes, I was. Well, is your sentence over? Yes, it is. And then the voting registration office sort of shifts the burden to our clients to say, well, you need to prove to us that your sentence is over before we register you. Now, I'm trying not to be too cynical about this, because it is the law that you have to be off your sentence to register. The problem has been, back to solutions and impediments, is that up until very, very recently, there has been nothing created inside the criminal justice system that shows that your sentence is over. Nothing. I've been in this work, as I said, for 30 years. And I never thought about it, so our clients started coming back to us again because of the long-term relationship, saying, I need something to bring back to the voting registration office. And we realized there's nothing created in a prosecutor's file, a court file, a court record, and even the probation or parole doesn't, up until recently, didn't do anything to show your sentence was over. And that has been a problem in more ways than just voting, and employment as well. So we started to recognize that, and when we did a poll of every voting registration office in the state a few years ago, just to ask what their procedures were about how they deal with people who are formerly incarcerated, who have that felony conviction. And we found that there isn't a unified approach to it in the state. And there's a lot of self-training. Meaning there's not a lot of direction about what those offices should do with regard to this client base or this population. So one of the things we brought this up with what's called the Department of Community Supervision in Georgia, which is the probation and parole department, who do a lot of reentry work. We work with them regularly and have for years. And we said, it might be a good idea if your office could create this certificate, which we found existed in about 10 other states, just to show when somebody's sentence is over that it's over. It would be very helpful for their lives and lots of fun. And they quickly said, that's a good idea. We'll do it. And so it took them a few years. We worked with them. We were sort of not necessarily totally at the table, but we were involved and informed about the process. And as of about, the end of last year or so, beginning of this year, the Department of Community Supervision now will issue what's called a certificate of sentence completion upon the request of a client, of a formerly incarcerated person. And any office in the state, a person can walk into and say, here's my name, here's my date of birth, can you give me this certificate? And it's all electronic, and they can just print it out and say, here, yes, you're done. And so now that person, for multiple purposes, has a piece of paper that, first of all, didn't exist before, never was created by the system, to show that they have satisfied their debt to society. And that piece of paper, then they can take, whether it's to an employer or to housing or to the voting registration office, to say, you asked me to show you a off paper, you asked me to show you the sentence is over, now I can show you. So we are really excited, and one of the things we want to make sure that folks who have a felony conviction in Georgia, formally lost the right to vote, that this mechanism is in place to help you get your right to vote back.
Thank you so much for that. Yes, it's super important. Honestly, Georgia Justice Project, you guys are organization superheroes, definitely helping people's lives. Thank you so, so much. And Doug, I do want to ask, currently what is Georgia Justice Project working on, and how can people, get involved?
So because we're an organization that works both with individuals and works with thousands of people a year, as well as working on sort of system change as well, like getting this, we're busy on both fronts. And so even just getting this victory, if you will, recently in the State House around expanding expungement, and that law, it's called SB 288. And that law goes into effect January the 1st, 2021. But now, for instance, I'll tell you what we're working on is now about 1.5 million people in Georgia have an access to an opportunity that didn't exist before. 1.5 million people with a conviction can appeal, can ask a judge to expunge and restrict and seal that conviction. So one of the things we're doing is working very aggressively all around the state with both local jurisdictions, with the state bar, with reentry programs, with training more volunteer lawyers to make sure that 1.5 million people can have that felt experience and the benefit of this law that passed, for instance. And we use a lot of volunteers on that, lawyers a lot, and paralegals as well. So one example is that's one of the things we're working on a lot. But we also are expanding our footprint in the state with regard to policy and in regard to direct service. Thanks to incredible support from the Candido Fund, we are expanding into probation issues as well. Georgia has the largest number of people on probation in the country. We are twice, almost 3 times the national average on probation. And by the way, if you're on probation, you can't vote. If you're on felony probation, you can't vote. So one of the things we're trying to push is both a direct service approach, is to help people get off probation faster, earlier, which you can do, but there's not a lot of resource for that in the community. But as well as to work at the State House, work with the state players to sort of find ways to decrease the number of people in Georgia who are on probation. And I'll give you one more as an example that we are really excited about, and we hope we'll get some quick traction at the State House, is driver's license suspensions. You know, being convicted of driving on a suspended license is the #1 conviction in the country. More people are convicted of that charge than anything else. And it is a charge and a conviction that is really almost solely connected to poverty. And it is like heaping on punishment upon punishment for folks who often can't pay the first traffic ticket and now they have multiple ones that spend time in jail. It's a terrible cycle. And we think we've been working with a number of folks, representing hundreds of people on this issue around the metro area. And we quickly solved the policy impediment, and we are moving upstream very aggressively to try to address that at the State House. So that's just a few things we're working on. Child support debt for those who are incarcerated is a big problem that we've been working on as well. And one more that maybe connects to sort of your world is occupational licensing, and that is employment. For a lot of people who can't get a job because of their criminal record, or just want to have their own business or be a self-employed contractor of some sort, many times the way to do that is to get a license to create their own business or their own professional license of some kind. There's impediments to that in this state for people who have a conviction. We've been successful in getting some laws changed, but we know there's still more work to do on that, because that's a path for folks to rebuild their lives. We want to make that broader and easier for them and for the rest of society.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for the examples as well. Oh my gosh, we have so much further to go, but I know we'll get there one day. I know. Well, Doug, thank you so much. And if people want to learn more about, what's going on with Georgia Justice Project, where can they get more information at?
So our website's really easy. It's GJP, our initials, Georgia Justice Project. GJP.org is our website. You'll find a lot of information about, what we're doing, ways to get involved, whether it's through policy or some of our, well, God willing, when COVID is over and we'll be back to having in-person events, we have a lot of expungement events. We've working with folks all over the state. Right now, those are all virtual, for instance. But there's a lot of ways to get involved. By going to our website, you can get a sense of the scope of the work and the ways that we're showing up around the state. And we'd love to have folks know more about them and find a way to get involved.
Awesome. You've already heard it. Definitely go visit if you'd like some more information about what Georgia Justice Project is doing, or if you're not in the state of Georgia, and you can always look and see how you can bring new ideas to your own state. Awesome. And then I know, National Voter Registration Day is approaching. Doug, do you have any words to say about our viewers about that and the importance?
Again, you have to register to vote. I mean, you have to get that done before. A lot of folks wait till the day of voting and they say, I want to go vote, but I forgot to change my address or I forgot to re-register. And then their ballots are conditional ballots and waiting in the wings. And often, that creates a whole nother bureaucratic layer that will often not lead to their vote being counted. So registering in time is huge. and particularly for the population we're talking about. I mean, a lot of folks might have voted years ago before their conviction, and just thought it didn't exist. They've moved a few times. You can't just walk into the voting polls the day of voting and vote without registering in advance. And you've got to get there, before, I think it's the deadline, and registering to vote is the first step in being able to have your voice heard to vote on election day.
Thank you so, so much. You guys have heard it. National Voter Registration Day is vastly approaching. Election Day, it'll be here before you know it. 2020 is almost over. I guess I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but definitely, if you haven't already, go register to vote. Let's exercise this democratic right. And especially if you have been formerly incarcerated and you are able to vote now in your state, in the state of Georgia, or wherever you are. Exercise that right, use it. We're giving back to the communities in which we're in. So definitely go ahead and register to vote. Again, thank you so much, Doug, for all of the information. I know our viewers are probably blessed to have all that information from you, being able to help their family or their friends, or just knowing this information because they need to know it for their own selves. So thank you so, so much again. Georgia Justice Project is such an amazing organization. Definitely go visit them, visit their website. Thank you, Doug. And this is another great episode of The Scoop. My name is Daminga. You have a great day, everybody.